All right. I want you to picture a dinner party. It's a hypothetical dinner party, but the guest list is very real.
Okay, I'm with you. Sounds intriguing.
At the head of the table, you have a neuroscientist, and I mean a serious one. He's got a PhD from UCLA. He spent years studying belief in the brain using fMRI machines.
Right, so very rigorous, very scientific, hard data.
The hardest. But sitting right next to him is a meditation teacher. You know, the kind of guy who dropped out of college to spend 11 years in silence, mostly in the Himalayas.
Okay.
Someone who talks about things like unconditional love and the illusion of the self.
A little contrasting, to say the least,
Hmm.
but I can see it. You know, science and spirituality, they can sometimes mix.
They can, but wait. Then across from them is a guy who is absolutely scorching the earth on the topic of Islam.
Uh-oh.
He's arguing that we need to stop being so polite about religious dogmas that, in his view, get people killed. He's making a case for profiling. He's even arguing that torture might be rational in very specific ticking time bomb scenarios.
Wow. Okay, that definitely changes the vibe of the party. Significantly.
And next to him is a registered Democrat who says he hates Donald Trump, has voted for every Democrat from Obama to Kamala Harris, but is being shouted down by his own party.
For what?
For owning guns and for criticizing what he calls wokeness.
And let me guess.
Mm-hmm.
The punchline here is that every single person at this table,
Is the same man.
every single chair is occupied by the same man.
That is exactly it. Today we are talking about Sam Harris, and I have to say, preparing for this deep dive was kind of exhausting.
I believe it.
It really feels like we're trying to analyze four completely different people who just happen to inhabit the same body.
You know, it's funny you say that because that feeling of confusion is actually central to understanding him.
How so?
Well, Harris is arguably one of the most difficult public intellectuals to categorize in the 21st century. I mean, depending on your Twitter algorithm, he is either a hero of reason who speaks the uncomfortable truths nobody else will touch, or he's a gateway drug to the alt-right and a pseudoscientist.
Yeah.
He's been called a champion of reason and also accused of peddling junk science, or just outright bigotry.
The pendulum swing on public opinion of him is just wild. I mean, you have Ben Affleck on HBO literally screaming that Harris's views are gross and racist.
I remember that clip vividly.
And then, on the other hand, you have millions of people, literally millions, using his app, waking up to find inner peace and compassion. How do we square that circle?
And that is our mission today. We are not here to decide if Sam Harris is good or bad. We're not trying to cancel him or canonize him.
No, not at all.
We are here to look at the architecture of his mind. We have a massive stack of sources in front of us. His books like The End of Faith, Waking Up, The Moral Landscape, Free Will. We've got hours and hours of his podcast Making Sense, and of course the transcripts of his biggest public controversies.
So the goal is to figure out how he gets from meditation is the path to happiness all the way over to free will is a total lie.
And how he manages to make almost everyone, from the religious right to the progressive left, absolutely furious in the process.
It's a journey into what he calls the middle way.
It is. But I should warn you, it's not a comfortable path. It really requires checking your tribal allegiances at the door before we begin.
I think that's fair. So let's start where it all began, the origin story. Because if you only know him as this, horseman of atheism, you probably expect a certain kind of background.
Right. You'd probably guess either a cold, clinical, scientific upbringing, or maybe a really traumatic religious one that he's now rebelling against.
And you would be wrong on both counts.
Completely wrong.
Let's go back to 1967. Sam Harris is born in Los Angeles, and this is probably my favorite random fact about him, and I refuse to just gloss over it.
I think I know where you're going with this.
His mother is Susan Harris.
The legendary TV creator.
Not just any TV creator. She created the Golden Girls.
It's a fantastic detail that I think most people completely miss. It's just a perfect piece of trivia.
Right. So the man who writes about the end of religion and the apocalypse of artificial intelligence is the son of the woman who gave us Rose, Blanche, Dorothy, and Sophia. It's amazing.
And his dad, Berkeley Harris, he was an actor. He came from a Quaker background, and his mother's background was Jewish.
But here's the crucial part. Harris wasn't raised in some militant atheist household. That's not the story at all.
No, and that's a really important distinction he makes all the time. He's spoken about this extensively. It wasn't that his parents sat him down and said, "There is no God, religion is stupid."
It's just nothing.
It was just irrelevant. It wasn't a topic of conversation. He was raised entirely secular. He's even said he didn't really realize he was Jewish in terms of ancestry until much, much later. He was just a kid growing up in L.A.
So, okay, he's this kid in LA. He heads off to Stanford University, starts out as an English major. Seems like a pretty standard path for a bright kid. But then something happens. The catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a book. It's not a lecture he attended. It's MDMA. He takes ecstasy. Now, usually when we hear stories about college kids taking ecstasy, the story ends with a rave or maybe a really bad hangover. But for Harris, this was something else entirely.
Yeah, and we have to be really careful here because Harris is very specific about how he frames this experience. He isn't out there telling his audience, hey, go do drugs.
Of course not.
But he describes this moment as an epistemological shock.
Epistemological. Okay, so break that down. It changed how he knew what he knew.
Exactly that. Before the MDMA, Harris lived in what most of us consider normal reality. You know, you wake up, you're anxious about your grades, you're annoyed by the weather, you're thinking about what to have for lunch.
The constant internal monologue.
Yes. You assume that this low-level hum of neurosis, that voice in your head that is constantly chattering away, you just assume that's what being a human is.
It's the default setting. It's like the water we're all swimming in.
And then the chemical hits his brain. And suddenly that self, that anxious, neurotic knot that feels like it's in the center of his chest, it just unspools.
It dissolves.
It dissolves. He describes feeling this boundless sense of love for a friend he was sitting with. But it wasn't just feeling good. The crucial part was the realization that his capacity for well-being was much, much deeper than he had ever thought possible.
That's a great analogy I heard you use once. It's like discovering your car has a sixth gear you never even knew about.
That's it, exactly.
You've been driving in third gear your whole life thinking that was the top speed, and then suddenly you realize the machine can do so much more.
A perfect analogy. He realized that the ceiling of human consciousness was miles higher than where he had been living day to day. But here's the kicker, and this is the quintessentially Sam Harris part of the story. He didn't want to just keep taking the drug.
Right, because the drug wears off.
Yeah.
And, presumably you can't be high on MDMA while you're trying to write an English paper or navigate rush hour traffic.
Precisely. The drug wears off, it has physiological costs, and it's not a sustainable way to live. So the question that seized him was, is this state of mind real? Or is it just a chemical trick, an illusion?
And if it is real,
can I get back to that mountaintop without needing the helicopter? Can I train my mind, sober, to inhabit that space of well-being?
and that one question, can I train my brain to be this happy sober, is what made him drop out of Stanford.
He literally walked away. He left Stanford in his second year. And this is the part that's hard to fathom. He spent the next 11 years, over a decade, primarily in India and Nepal.
11 years. Can you imagine telling your parents, hey, so that whole English major thing at Stanford isn't working out. I'm going to go sit in silence in the Himalayas for about a decade.
I am sure that was a difficult conversation to have, but we need to dispel this idea that this was some kind of vacation. He wasn't just drifting or finding himself in some vague eat, pray, love kind of sense. He was training.
What does that training actually look like? What was he doing for 11 years?
It looks like silence. A lot of silence. He did silent retreats that would last for months at a time. I mean, just try to imagine that. No talking, no reading, no writing.
Nothing.
Just sitting for 12 to 18 hours a day, staring at the back of your own eyelids, trying to dissect your own mind piece by piece.
I can barely sit still for 15 minutes without wanting to check my phone. 11 years of that kind of mental rigor it's just hard to fathom.
It really shows the level of obsession he had with that question. And he studied with some real heavy hitters, too. People like Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was a master of a Tibetan practice called Dzogchen.
And this is crucial for you, the listener, to understand. Harris wasn't looking for God. He wasn't praying for a miracle or trying to find a new religion.
No, he was treating meditation as a technology.
A technology. Explain that.
He viewed these ancient contemplative traditions not as religions full of dogma, but as user manuals for the human brain. He wanted to strip away all the cultural baggage, the chants, the robes, the incense, and just find the source code.
He wanted to understand the mechanics of how to stop suffering.
That's it. It was an engineering problem for him. And there's one detail from this period that I just found absolutely wild. In the early 90s, he actually served as a volunteer guard for the Dalai Lama.
It's such a striking image, isn't it?
It really is.
Sam Harris, the future scourge of all religious dogma, wearing a suit and an earpiece or whatever the security detail wore standing guard for the leader of Tibetan Buddhism.
But it actually makes perfect sense when you look at his later work. He was seeing religion up close, but he was viewing it through that specific lens of practice rather than dogma.
Yeah.
He saw the Dalai Lama not as a divine being, but as a master practitioner of the mind, an Olympian of consciousness.
So after 11 years of seeking this middle path, he finally returns to the West. He goes back to Stanford, finishes up, gets his philosophy degree in the year 2000. He seems ready to be a quiet philosopher or maybe a meditation teacher. And then the world changes.
September 11, 2001.
This is the trigger.
This is the moment everything pivots again. The attacks on the World Trade Center radicalized him, not in a violent way, of course, but intellectually. He looked at what happened, and he saw it not just as a political event or purely as a reaction to U.S. foreign policy. He saw it as a direct and horrifying consequence of belief.
Of ideas in people's heads.
Yes. He saw 19 highly educated men, engineers and so on, who flew planes into buildings because they genuinely believed they would be rewarded with paradise for doing so. And that connection between belief and action became his obsession.
So he started writing The End of Faith almost immediately after the attacks.
He did. And while he was writing it, he realized he needed more scientific ammunition for his arguments. So he didn't just write. He went back to school again, this time to get a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from UCLA, which he finished in 2009.
Using fMRI to study belief in the brain.
Exactly. His PhD thesis was actually titled The Moral Landscape: How Science Could Determine Human Values, which later became one of his most famous books. So by the late 2000s, the figure we know today is fully formed. He has the philosophical training, he has the deep spiritual and meditative background, and he has the hard neuroscience credentials.
And he is ready to enter the public arena.
And enter it he did.
Which brings us, of course, to The Four Horsemen.
A very dramatic title for a very dramatic shift in the culture at the time.
I mean, it really was a moment. You had Harris, Richard Dawkins, the late Christopher Hitchens, and the philosopher Daniel Dennett. They were like the Avengers of atheism.
Or maybe the Legion of Doom, depending on who you ask.
Right, and this new atheism was distinct from the kind of atheism that came before, wasn't it? Old school atheism was often polite. It was a private disbelief.
It was quiet. The new atheists, led by these four, argued that faith wasn't just wrong. It was actively dangerous. Harris's core argument, which he repeated over and over, was that pretending to know things one doesn't know is a betrayal of science.
But Harris differs from someone like Dawkins, doesn't he? Dawkins seems to view all religion as a kind of virus of the mind, all equally silly. Harris gets much more specific and I think much more controversial.
He does. And this is really where he gets into the most trouble. Harris argues very forcefully that the specific content of the religious doctrine matters. He says, it matters what you believe. And to prove this, he constantly uses this one comparison.
Jainism versus Islam.
Jainism versus Islam. It's his go-to example.
So for anyone who doesn't know, tell us about the Jains. This is his model of a religion of peace, right?
It is. Jainism is an ancient Indian religion. Its core, fundamental, non-negotiable doctrine is nonviolence, or ahimsa. The most extreme fundamentalist Jains are so committed to nonviolence that they wear masks over their mouths so they don't accidentally inhale a gnat and kill it.
They sweep the ground in front of them as they walk.
Exactly, so they don't step on an ant. This is what a Jain extremist looks like. They are pathologically committed to pacifism.
Okay, I see where he's going with this. If you have a Jain extremist, the worst you get is a guy who is terrified of hurting a fly.
Precisely. Harris then contrasts this with his view on Islam. He argued, and this was way back in 2006, remember, that Islam is all fringe and no center. He called it, in a now infamous phrase, a mother lode of bad ideas.
Wow.
And his point was that if you have a doctrine that, in his reading, glorifies martyrdom and jihad and promises specific rewards in the afterlife for dying in battle for the faith, then a fundamentalist of that religion is going to behave very, very differently than a fundamentalist Jain.
So his argument is really this. Beliefs are the software running in the human brain. If you run the Jainism software, you get pacifism as the output. If you run what he calls the jihadist software, you get violence. And therefore, we can't just treat all religions as equally harmless.
Correct. He completely rejects the idea that all religions are just different paths up the same mountain. He thinks some of those paths lead directly off a cliff.
Now, this obviously led to the intense accusations of Islamophobia. But before we get there, we should be clear that he wasn't just attacking Islam. He went after Christianity just as hard.
Oh, absolutely. He was scorching on Christianity. He attacked the Christian right relentlessly for focusing on what he called pseudo-problems.
What's the pseudo-problem in his view?
Gay marriage is his classic example. He argued it was morally absurd that people were organizing their entire political lives around stopping two men from getting married, while ignoring what he saw as actual immense suffering in the world, like poverty or preventable disease.
And he also went after the Catholic Church with a sledgehammer, particularly regarding the child abuse scandals.
He did. He often made this comparison between their focus on contraception and their handling of the abuse.
Right. What was the argument there?
He said it was morally grotesque that the church spent so much energy and resources preventing contraception, which he argued prevents zero actual suffering, while simultaneously covering up the systematic rape of children by priests. He even called for ending the Vatican's diplomatic immunity. He wanted the Pope and the bishops to be held legally liable in secular courts.
That is pretty hardcore. But what I find really interesting is that he also attacked liberal Christians. Why go after the moderates? They're not the ones causing the problems.
Because in his view, they provide rhetorical cover for the fundamentalists.
How does that work?
He argues that by demanding respect for faith as a valid way of knowing, moderate Christians make it impossible to effectively criticize the extremists. If we all agree that faith is a legitimate reason to believe something without sufficient evidence, then we have no tools left to tell the fundamentalist that he's wrong about his 72 virgins.
So he wants to destroy the very prestige of faith as a concept.
The entire concept. He wants it to be seen as intellectually disreputable.
But the Islam critique, that's what really exploded in the public sphere. And we have to talk about the Ben Affleck incident.
It's probably the single most famous moment of his career, at least in the mainstream media. This was in 2014 on the show Real Time with Bill Maher.
I remember watching this clip go viral. It's just electric. You have Bill Maher, who agrees with Harris, and Sam Harris, and then you have Ben Affleck, who looks like he's about to physically explode with rage.
He's vibrating.
He is. Harris starts trying to explain his critique of Islam, distinguishing between the ideology of Islamism and the people who are Muslims, and Affleck just loses it. He interrupts him and calls it gross and racist.
And that one moment perfectly encapsulated the entire cultural divide on this issue. Harris was trying to make a very precise philosophical point. I am criticizing a set of ideas, not a race of people. Islam is not a race.
But Affleck wasn't hearing that.
No. Affleck was reacting from a different place. He was reacting to the vibe, to the feeling that Harris was demonizing a marginalized group that was already facing a lot of discrimination in the post-9/11 West. It was a clash of logic versus emotion, or ideas versus people.
And it wasn't just Affleck. I mean, Noam Chomsky, the titan of the left, called Harris's charges hysterical and slanderous.
Yeah, their exchange was legendary in its own right. Others like Glenn Greenwald, Reza Aslan, they all essentially labeled him a bigot.
So what has Harris's defense been over the years?
It has been remarkably consistent. He rejects the term Islamophobia entirely. He calls it a pernicious meme that was specifically designed to silence legitimate criticism of dangerous ideas. He argues that if you can't criticize bad ideas just because they are considered religious, then you are abandoning the most important tool we have, which is reason.
And he tried to bridge this gap, right? He co-wrote a book with Maajid Nawaz.
He did. The book is called Islam and the Future of Tolerance. And Maajid Nawaz is a fascinating figure. He's a former Islamist radical, someone who was actively recruiting for a global caliphate, who then had a change of heart and became a secular reformer.
So Harris wanted to show, look, I'm not against Muslims. I can have a productive conversation with a Muslim. In fact, I am supporting the reformers against the fundamentalists.
That was the goal, to show it was a battle of ideas, not of people.
So that's the new atheist, Sam Harris, the polemicist. But then you close that book and you open his app, Waking Up, and suddenly he's gently guiding you through a loving-kindness meditation. It feels like a total 180-degree turn.
It really does, but Harris insists it's all perfectly consistent.
Yeah.
And this brings us to what we could call section 3 of his thought, spirituality without religion.
Right. He totally rejects the binary. He says you don't have to choose between being a hard-nosed scientific materialist on one hand and having deep, profound spiritual experiences on the other.
And he has this quote that I think sums it up perfectly. He says, "Everything of value that people get from religion can be had more honestly, without presuming anything on insufficient evidence."
That is his core thesis for this part of his life's work.
It is. He is trying to reclaim words like spirituality and mysticism from the grip of religion. He believes these are fundamental human experiences related to the nature of consciousness, not supernatural ones.
But what is he actually teaching in this app and in his book, Waking Up? It's not just relax and breathe deeply, right? It's more than that.
Oh, it's much more rigorous. It goes right back to his 11 years in the Himalayas. He's teaching practices from Tibetan Dzogchen and from Vipassana meditation. And the central insight, the one thing he's trying to drive home in every single session, is the illusion of the self.
Okay, this is the heavy stuff. The self is an illusion. What does that actually mean? Because right now, I feel like I'm here. I feel like I'm a passenger sitting behind my eyes driving this body. I am the thinker of my thoughts. That feels very real.
And Harris would say that that feeling, that very sensation of being a passenger, a little homunculus in your head, is a persistent and convincing trick of the mind. He argues that if you look closely enough in meditation, you can't actually find the thinker.
But wait, if I can't find the thinker, who is doing the looking?
Exactly. That is the question he wants you to ask. He argues there is just consciousness. There is just the raw experience of seeing, of hearing, of thinking. There isn't a little you that is separate from the experience itself.
Can you give me an analogy?
Sure. He sometimes uses the analogy of a movie screen. The screen doesn't watch the movie that's projected onto it. The screen is the place where the movie is happening. He's saying your consciousness is the screen, not the guy in the audience eating popcorn.
That sounds, honestly, a little terrifying. The idea of losing yourself.
He argues it's the most liberating experience a person can have. If there is no self to protect, there is no reason to be defensive or insecure. If someone insults you and there's no solid ego there to receive the insult, the words just pass through you like the wind. He believes this insight is the only key to actual sustainable happiness.
And he put all of this into practice with the Waking Up app. And speaking of putting things into practice, he also put his money where his mouth is. He signed the Giving What We Can pledge.
That's right. He was actually the first company to sign this pledge, which commits him to donating at least 10% of the app's profits to the world's most effective charities. And he even did it retroactively back to the app's launch.
And this connects to his belief in effective altruism.
It does. Using reason and data to maximize the good you can do in the world, it all flows from the same rationalist worldview.
Which segues perfectly into his views on morality. Because this is the classic question. If there is no God who says what is good and what is bad, why is donating to charity good? Why isn't it just survival of the fittest?
This is the entire subject of his book, The Moral Landscape. And in it, Harris makes a very bold, very controversial claim. Science can determine human values.
Okay, now most philosophers would hear that and say, whoa, stop right there. You know, the famous is-ought problem from David Hume. You can't get an ought from an is.
Right. The traditional view is that science can tell us facts about what is. But religion or philosophy has to tell us about values, about what we ought to do.
And Harris thinks that whole distinction is nonsense.
He thinks it's a philosophical mistake. He proposes this metaphor he calls the moral landscape. So I want you to imagine a vast landscape with many peaks and many valleys. The peaks represent the greatest possible well-being for conscious creatures. The valleys represent the worst possible suffering. Think of it as hell of the worst imaginable torture and misery for everyone.
Okay, so obviously we want to be on the peaks, not in the valleys.
Right. And Harris argues that moving from the valleys up toward the peaks is an objective navigation problem. He says it's just like medicine.
How is it like medicine? I don't see the connection.
Well, think about it. Medicine is a science. Its goal is health. Now, health is a value judgment. We all agree that living is preferable to dying, that not being in pain is better than being in pain. But once we agree that health is the goal, there are objective scientific facts about how to get there.
Like drinking bleach is objectively bad for your health.
Exactly. And eating vegetables is objectively good for your health. Those aren't opinions. They are facts based on biology and chemistry.
So he's saying morality is just the medicine of human flourishing.
That's it, exactly. He says a statement like, forcing women to wear bags over their heads and denying them an education is bad for their well-being isn't a cultural opinion. He argues that it is a scientific fact about the human brain and societal flourishing.
So he rejects moral relativism entirely. He doesn't care if it's their culture.
Not one bit. If a practice demonstrably harms the well-being of conscious creatures, he says it is objectively, morally wrong.
It's a very confident worldview. It really cuts through a lot of that who are we to judge hesitancy that you see in modern liberalism. But then, just as you're on board with this hyper-rational project, he takes another step that seems to undermine everything we just talked about.
You're talking about free will.
The book Free Will published in 2012. This is, for me, perhaps his most provocative and brain-bending philosophical stance. He argues that free will is a complete and total illusion.
He calls us the biochemical puppet.
Yes. And he has this great line. He says, "You can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do."
Let's break that down because it does break your brain the first few times you hear it.
Please. So I chose to have coffee this morning. I stood in the cafe. I thought about maybe getting tea, and then I consciously said, I'll have a coffee. That felt like a free choice.
Okay. But did you choose to want coffee in that moment?
I guess not. The desire for coffee just appeared.
Just appeared.
Oh.
And why did you want it? Maybe you were tired. Did you choose to be tired?
No, my kid kept me up half the night.
Right. And did you choose to have the specific genes that make you like the taste of coffee? Did you choose to be born into a culture that sells coffee on every corner? Did you choose the specific pattern of neurons firing in your brain a millisecond before the thought of coffee even surfaced in your consciousness?
No. No to all of that.
Harris's argument is that if you look closely enough at any choice, you'll see it's just the final domino falling in an unimaginably long chain of prior causes that goes all the way back to the Big Bang. Your genes, your upbringing, your environment, the state of your nervous system. You didn't author any of that. Thoughts simply arise in consciousness. You don't create them, you witness them.
So if we could have rewound the universe by 5 minutes this morning with every atom in the exact same position, I would have ordered the coffee again.
100% of the time. You are a biological machine processing inputs and producing an output. There's no ghost in the machine making a free choice.
Wow. Okay, if that's true, that changes everything, especially something like criminal justice. If a murderer is just a broken machine, how can we possibly blame him?
We can't. And Harris fully embraces that radical conclusion. He argues that hating a murderer makes no logical sense.
That seems impossible. I mean, it's a basic human instinct. If someone hurts your family, you're going to hate them.
But think about it this way. Would you hate a hurricane that destroyed your house? Would you hate a bear that attacked you while you were hiking?
I'd be angry and terrified, but I wouldn't think the bear was evil. It's just a bear doing what bears do.
Harris says that human beings are just very, very complicated bears. If a man has a brain tumor that presses on his amygdala and makes him uncontrollably violent, which has actually happened in real court cases, we don't say he is evil, we say he is sick. Harris's point is that everyone is just a product of their tumors, their genes, and their bad wiring.
So does that mean we shouldn't punish people? We just let them go?
No, of course not. We should absolutely restrain them. You lock up the bear so it doesn't hurt anyone else, but you don't torture the bear for revenge. You don't punish it because you think it deserves to suffer. He believes that realizing free will is an illusion should lead to a profound sense of compassion. No one chooses to be broken. No one chooses their worst impulses.
It's such a wild combination of ideas. On the one hand, he's judging ideologies like Islamism incredibly harshly. But on the other hand, he's saying the individual people who hold those views are just biological robots who couldn't have turned out any other way.
And that's the tension at the heart of his worldview. It's a kind of deterministic humanism that is deeply concerned with bettering the code that we are all running, even if we can't choose it.
Which brings us inevitably to the messy, messy world of politics. Because if you thought his views on religion and free will were polarizing, just wait until we get to his politics.
Yeah, this is where a lot of people get confused. He describes himself as a liberal. He's a registered Democrat.
Let's check the receipts on that. He supported Obama in 2008. He supported Hillary Clinton in 2016. He supported Andrew Yang in the 2020 primary, and then Joe Biden in the general. He's on record supporting Kamala Harris for 2024. And he is famously profoundly anti-Trump.
He has called Trump's assault on truth unprecedented. For him, Trump isn't just a bad politician with bad policies. He views him as a kind of moral and intellectual black hole that threatens the very foundations of a reality-based society.
But this is a huge but for many on the left. He also owns guns, and this is where his liberal allies get off the bus.
He does, and this really confuses people. But again, if you look at it through his rationality first framework, it makes a certain kind of sense.
Explain his logic there.
He argues that the police cannot always be there in time. That's just a fact. If someone breaks into your house, you are on your own for 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Therefore, from a purely rational standpoint, self-defense is a problem you may need to solve for yourself.
So he treats it like a math problem, not a culture war issue.
Exactly. He's on record opposing assault weapons bans, not for some ideological reason, but because he looked at the FBI crime statistics and sees that handguns are used to commit the vast majority of gun crimes. He supports universal background checks and rigorous training, but he refuses to treat guns as a totem of evil. He just sees them as tools, and he makes a rational case for owning them for self-defense.
And then there's the whole intellectual dark web chapter, the IDW. This is a huge cultural moment around 2018.
IDW, yes. The journalist Bari Weiss wrote that famous article in the New York Times, and she grouped Harris with people like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Brett Weinstein, and Ben Shapiro. They were the renegades.
The avengers of free speech, the critics of cancel culture.
They were united by a willingness to discuss topics that were considered taboo by the mainstream media and academia. And Harris was, for a while, seen as a central figure in that group.
It didn't last. Harris very famously and publicly handed in his imaginary membership card.
He did. He walked away from the whole thing.
Why? Why did he leave? It seemed like he was the star of that particular show.
The wedge issues were Donald Trump and, later, COVID-19. Harris has a very, very low tolerance for what he sees as conspiracy thinking.
So he couldn't stand the stuff about the 2020 election being stolen.
Exactly. When people in that circle, like Brett Weinstein, started promoting ivermectin and questioning the safety of vaccines, or when Majid Nawaz, his former co-author on the book about Islam, went down the election fraud rabbit hole, Harris cut ties.
He criticized something he called audience capture. What is that?
Audience capture is his term for when a public figure starts saying what their audience wants to hear, rather than what they believe is true, in order to keep the clicks, the downloads, and the money flowing. He saw the IDW sliding into what he called Trumpism just to please their right-leaning followers.
So he basically said, I don't care if we agree on criticizing wokeness. If you are pushing anti-vaccine nonsense or saying the election was stolen, you are fundamentally damaging the epistemological health of our society, and I'm out.
That's a perfect summary. You really burned some bridges there.
And speaking of burning bridges, we have to talk about the Hunter Biden comment. This is the one thing that the right still hammers him for years later.
Oh, man. The corpses of children comment.
Even just saying it out loud sounds completely insane.
He was on a podcast after the 2020 election. He was trying to explain why he didn't care about the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was being suppressed by the media and Twitter at the time. And in a moment of extreme hyperbole, he said that even if Hunter Biden had corpses of children in his basement, he wouldn't have cared.
Which on its face sounds deranged. It sounds morally monstrous.
Taken literally, yes, it's a terrible thing to say. But his point was meant to be a utilitarian calculation. He viewed Donald Trump as an existential threat to democracy like an asteroid headed for Earth. The Hunter Biden laptop story, in his view, was just standard political sleaze.
So he was arguing that you don't worry about the petty thief in your house, Hunter, when the asteroid that will wipe out all life, Trump, is about to hit.
That was the intended logic. He was saying, I would accept a deeply corrupt administration to stop a democracy-ending one. But the clip went viral completely out of context, and it cemented the idea on the right that Harris suffers from a terminal case of Trump derangement syndrome.
And speaking of existential threats, we have to talk about his other great obsession, artificial intelligence.
Yes, AI. Long before ChatGPT made it a dinner table conversation, Harris was one of the loudest voices sounding the alarm about the potential risks.
What is his specific fear? Is it, Terminator robots with glowing red eyes?
It's actually much simpler and more logical than that. He uses a simple syllogism. 1, intelligence is just information processing in a physical system. 2, we will continue to improve our machines and make them more intelligent. 3, we are nowhere near the peak of possible intelligence.
Wait, 4.
Therefore, it is almost inevitable that we will eventually create machines that are far, far more intelligent than we are.
And when they surpass us, what happens then?
Then we are in the position of ants trying to negotiate with human construction workers. The humans don't hate the ants. They're not evil. But if the humans want to build a new highway right where the anthill is, it's very bad news for the ants.
So his fear is that we are building a god that might not share our values, and we have absolutely no safety features in place to control it.
That is his nightmare scenario. He calls it the alignment problem. How do you make sure a superintelligence is aligned with human well-being? And his answer is, we have no idea, and we are not taking the risk seriously enough.
Okay, let's move into the really recent history. The last few years, from 2020 to 2026 in our timeline, have been particularly intense for his public reputation.
To say the least, it's been a whirlwind.
So we mentioned COVID. He was a hardliner on vaccines and very critical of the skeptics. He said in 2023 that if COVID had killed more children, there would have been no patience for all the skepticism. But he was also open to the lab leak theory, wasn't he?
He was. He hosted scientists like Matt Ridley and Alina Chan on his podcast to discuss it. This is a key part of his mindset. He was willing to follow the scientific evidence wherever it led, even if it led to an unpopular conclusion like the lab leak. But he had zero tolerance for the pandemic-style conspiracy theories. He still fundamentally trusts scientific institutions, which puts him very at odds with the current populist moment.
Then came October 7, 2023, the Hamas attack on Israel and the subsequent war.
And this put Harris right back in the center of the debate on religion, ideology, and violence. He has a nuanced but very firm stance here.
So on the one hand, he opposes all religious claims to land. He doesn't think God gave real estate to anyone.
Right. But on the other hand, he supports Israel's existence as a necessary haven for Jewish people, given the long and brutal history of global anti-Semitism.
After the attacks, he came out swinging against what he called moral equivalence.
He did. He argued that there is a fundamental moral difference between a terrorist group that intentionally targets civilians and uses its own people as human shields, which is Hamas, and a state army that he says accidentally kills civilians while trying to target those terrorists, which is the IDF.
And he took a lot of heat for that from the left.
A huge amount. From people who looked at the staggering civilian death toll in Gaza and said, a dead child is a dead child. The intent doesn't matter.
But at the same time, he's not a blank check supporter of the Israeli government. He's not a Netanyahu fanboy.
And not at all. By July of 2025, according to the R timeline, he was expressing deep reservations about his support, specifically citing Netanyahu's corruption charges and the presence of religious extremists in the Israeli cabinet. He makes a sharp distinction between the defense of the state of Israel and the actions of its specific government.
And looking at our timeline here, June 2025, there's an entry called Operation Midnight Hammer.
Yes. This refers to a moment during the escalation of the Iran-Israel war. And Harris publicly supported this specific Israeli military strike against Iranian nuclear facilities.
And that's consistent with his view from the end of faith 20 years prior.
Chillingly consistent. His view has always been that a messianic, apocalyptic Islamist regime, like the one in Iran, armed with nuclear weapons, represents a unique danger to civilization.
Why unique?
Because the Cold War logic of mutually assured destruction, or Mad Eye, might not work on them.
Because if you truly believe that dying as a martyr in a holy war will send you to paradise, you might not be afraid of nuclear annihilation.
Exactly. If you love death more than you love life, as some extremists claim, then nuclear deterrence fails. And Harris argued we simply could not let the mullahs get the bomb.
Before we wrap up the controversies, we have to touch on the Charles Murray incident. This is the one that really got him labeled a peddler of junk science by places like Vox.
This was a pivotal and very damaging moment for his reputation on the left. In 2017, he hosted Charles Murray, the co-author of the infamous book The Bell Curve, on his podcast.
The Bell Curve being the book that discusses statistical differences in IQ scores between racial groups.
Right, it's radioactive material. Now, Harris claimed he didn't care about the data on race and IQ one way or the other. He said he invited Murray on his show because Murray had been violently protested and shut down at Middlebury College. For Harris, it was a free speech issue. He wanted to protest the mob.
But by hosting him to talk about the book, he walked right into the minefield of race science.
He jumped in with both feet. Ezra Klein at Vox, along with a number of scientists, wrote scathing critiques, accusing him of naively promoting racialist speculation and junk science. Harris viewed this as a defamatory moral panic. He argued that as scientists, we have to be able to follow data wherever it leads without fear.
But his critics argued that he was promoting data that has a century-long history of being used to justify racism, and he was doing it without understanding the historical context or the scientific critiques of the work itself.
It was complete mess, and it really solidified his reputation on the progressive left as someone who was anti-woke first and liberal second.
So we've covered the man, the monk, the atheist, the neuroscientist, and the political polemicist. That is a lot of hats for one head.
It is a very crowded head, I imagine.
So if we try to synthesize all of this, if we try to step back and sum up Sam Harris, what is he?
You know, I've come to view Sam Harris as a kind of stress test for modern discourse. He forces you to confront the contradictions and the uncomfortable gray areas in your own worldview.
I mean,
Well, think about it. If you were a religious conservative, he agrees with you that Islamism is a profound threat, but then he turns around and tells you that your own belief in God is a dangerous fairy tale. If you are a secular liberal, he agrees with you on gay rights and abortion and taxing the rich, but then he tells you that your identity politics are toxic, your cultural relativism is cowardice, and you should probably own a gun.
he fits nowhere.
He is politically and tribally homeless. He combines this rigid, almost robotic adherence to scientific materialism with a deep, almost poetic appreciation for the subjective, first-person experience of consciousness.
He is a liberal who hates the left's current iteration. He is an atheist who thinks the most important thing you can possibly do is close your eyes and find the sacred in your own mind.
This bundle of contradictions.
And that brings us to the final provocative thought, the paradox that honestly keeps me up at night when I read his work.
I think I know what it is. The free will paradox.
Exactly. Here is a man who has convinced himself through logic and introspection that we are all biochemical puppets. He believes our thoughts are just neurons firing, determined by the laws of physics stretching back to the dawn of time. We have no choice. We are not the authors of our actions.
Right, that's the core of his argument.
And yet, he spends his entire life writing books, recording podcasts, giving lectures, debating people, arguing, trying to persuade us.
It is the ultimate irony, isn't it?
If we are just puppets, what is the point of the podcast? Why try to change a puppet's mind if the puppet has no actual mind to change? Why write a book called The Moral Landscape if we can't freely choose to climb toward the peaks of well-being?
I think Harris would have an answer for that. He would say that the argument itself is just another input into the biological machine. My words entering your ear are a physical cause that will change the physical state of your brain. He is simply providing a new set of causes into the system that will hopefully have a new and better effect.
He sees himself as reprogramming the robots.
Essentially, yes. But you're right to point out the tension. There's a deep emotional contradiction between viewing human beings as wet robots on one hand and viewing them as rational agents who can be persuaded to save the world through reasoned conversation on the other.
Is the rationality that he prizes so highly just another biological program playing itself out? Is his lifelong commitment to reason just another flavor of instinct that he himself did not choose?
That is the question. And I don't think even Sam Harris has fully or satisfactorily answered it.
Well, we are going to leave you with that particular philosophical headache. If you want to dive deeper into this yourself, check out his book, The End of Faith to Meet the Firebrand Harris, or his book, Waking Up to Meet the Guru Harris. Or you can download the app and see if you can find your own illusion of the self.
Just don't blame us if you disappear in the process.
Exactly. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.